Welcome, dear listeners, to the Right Here, Right Queer podcast. This is Noah Hawthorne, and today I'm with Kara Jorgensen. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, you just had a book come out recently. Let's hear about it.
So I just had The Reanimator's Remains come out in October. It's the third book in the Reanimator mystery series, which features a autistic necromancer and his undead love as they solve mysteries in 1890s New York City. In this case, they end up being in the Pine Barrens, New Jersey, with a murder town, and we are delving into Oliver and Felipe's pasts and their families.
Awesome. I've seen these books all over the place. It seems like they really connect with a lot of people. I, so far, have only read Kinship and Kindness, and I believe that was standalone, but I really enjoyed that. And I enjoy the way that you write characters. You touch on a lot of different identities, and many of your characters are disabled, and it's very refreshing.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's important to me as someone who is autistic and chronically ill. I definitely want more representation, especially in regards to neurodivergence and disability. Those things are important to me.
So would you say that's a big, motivator for when it comes to writing your stories?
Definitely. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of pushback, especially with traditional publishing and with sort of publishing in general, about who gets to be the hero, who gets to be the one who's loved and who finds romance. There's a lot of feelings that, like, people who are neurodivergent or disabled, like, oh, you're too complex to find love, or you're a burden. And I want these stories to show that no, you're not. And there are people who will love you even when you need help, even when you need a little something extra. There are people who are more than willing to accommodate that.
That's amazing. And I think you get a lot of the other side of that too, where they kind of, even though you're plenty old enough, it's like the infantilizing kind of thing. So it's just nice to see people being treated like adults, and just because they have disability doesn't mean otherwise.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially when, like, neurodivergence, often it's a spiky profile. So it's like, yeah, I might need help with some stuff, or this character might need help with some stuff, but they're still an adult who still wants adult things and to have, an adult's life.
I see you've got a lot of different series and books. Like Reanimator Mysteries, is that what you're mainly working on right now?
Yeah, so right now that's my current main series. And what I plan to do with this one is there's going to be one more book with Oliver and Felipe. And then I plan to go and sort of flesh out the Paranormal Society romances, which you mentioned Kinship and Kindness earlier. That book technically belongs to that series. I just forgot to make book two. I got distracted. So instead, I plan to sort of flesh that series out. So it's going to be a connected series with a bunch of side characters from the Reanimator series reappearing and having their own adventures.
I love it when books do that and characters make cameos. It makes me want to read, like, all the different. I want to get all the backstory. I want the lore.
Me too. It's exactly like I get really excited when I'm like, oh, I recognize this person from somewhere else. And some of the characters in Kinship and Kindness make reappearances in the Reanimator series. So that's something I've enjoyed, sort of having them pop up randomly.
Like, hey, I missed you. Why don't you come hang out for a little bit?
Exactly.
What do you hope to accomplish with your stories?
I think one of the big things is, because I write historical paranormal stories, is kind of showing that a lot of the issues we have now were like we see the beginnings of in the 1890s. So, like, right now, talking about Comstock laws have come back up again, which in the 1890s, it was really supposed to be sort of curtailing quote unquote pornographic material. And it also ended up delaying, like, medical books being shipped, and it created all sorts of problems there. And now those laws are being used for censorship today. And even some of our very American Puritanism comes from, once again, the 1890s. Things like Dr. Kellogg, who was sort of a big figurehead of this sort of movement, and others. Things that we're dealing with today were equally as prevalent back then. And also, of course, trying to show that, queer people and trans people have been around forever. So I like sort of giving the historical, little hidden corners where we get to see where, marginalized people were sort of hanging out.
That's beautiful, and it's very true. I feel like if we don't learn our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And obviously, I think the hope side of it, like, they dealt with it and they came out on the other side. And yeah, we have to deal with it again, but we'll get through it. And I like that a lot.
Me too.
I'm currently writing a historical, and I found that, like you say, we've always existed. We're just hiding in the nooks and crannies, and it's kind of fun to explore what those nooks and crannies were.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because I thought, like, oh, it's just like little hidden spaces. And then, like, I started doing research. I think it was, I'm not sure if this is the author's name. I think it's George Chaucer's Gay New York. And, like, there were gay clubs and there was a whole, like, gay scene. And it's kind of amazing when you start digging, you're like, oh no, it was there. And it wasn't even really that hidden in some cases.
Do you have any stories that inspire you?
It's funny because, right now, Interview with the Vampire is so popular, and Anne Rice was probably one of my biggest inspirations as a kid. I read her books when I was probably, 11 to 14. I was like really heavy duty into her books, and inappropriate age-wise, but I was really into it, and I feel like her work sort of imprinted on me like a baby duck, and I'm like, oh no.
I'm stuck with this now.
Yes, this is forever my flavor.
It's not a bad flavor, though.
It's funny though, because I'm like, I'm a lot less toxic. Like, I'm not really into that, but the whole
Yes.
like rich queer history and, historical settings, I'm like, oh no, I know where this came from.
I can get on that train.
Yeah, more modern, more contemporary people who really inspire me though. Probably like Jordan L. Hawk, KJ Charles, Kat Sebastian. Right now, I love Ning Vo's work. They write sort of historical fantasy, either Asian set worlds or sort of 1920s Hollywood, Great Gatsby era kind of works, and they're just fantastic. Highly recommend, and they're all very queer and very fantastical.
They're on my endless TBR.
Yeah, the good thing is they're short. So if you're ever looking for a book that you need to sort of fill a little bit of time with, I mean, there are lots and lots of detail, lots and lots of layers crammed into a very tiny package.
I've really come to love novellas and short stories in the past year or two. I never used to like them because I get too attached, and I have a thing with endings, like it takes me forever to finish a book because I don't want to say goodbye. But in the past year or two, I've really started to enjoy them, reading and writing them, and I feel like there's a lot that you can say in such a short amount of words, and it can almost be a fun challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's something because I tend to be kind of a wordy person. Everything I write tends to grow bigger than I expected. So I'm always sort of in awe from a craft perspective of how, novella writers especially are able to get so much world building in so much in such a concise amount of words. And that's sort of what I love about like Ning Vo and Peta Jelly Clark, the same thing where I'm just like, damn, like that packed such a punch in like 120 pages.
Absolutely. A couple of novellas that really did that. They were by Kai Ashanti Wilson. There's The Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps, and there's another one that's set in the same world. But that is like heavy world building, heavy material. It is, and it's just like, wow, how do they do that? And it is mind blowing. But anyway. When it comes to your own stories, do you have a favorite character that you've created?
I always feel like this is so hard because it's like picking your favorite child or pet. But I feel like I really like my characters who I torture the most, which feels very mean. But I could probably say for my current series, so the Reanimator series, I really love Felipe. And I do think this poor man gets put through the ringer, but like, I think he's a very complex character. He was sort of raised to be a monster hunter, assassin, sort of hybrid. And he sort of took control of his life. And yes, he is sort of a formidable killing machine at the core of it, but he's also so soft and so compassionate, and he's more than willing to meet Oliver and his daughter and his, family and friends where they are. There's a very purposeful softness to him that he's cultivated purposely, sort of in spite of his upbringing. And it's like the more I write him, the more I appreciate him. And I just think that he's deeply complex, especially once you get further into the books. It's not as obvious in book 1 as it is by like book 3 when this really goes into this. But I love him for the fact that he has sort of fought against what he was raised to do.
Characters like that just need a big hug.
Yeah, he definitely needs a hug and a blanket and something warm to drink.
So one of the things that I find is common when it comes to romance is, or there's one of two things that I see. One is series that follows the same couple, and the other one are different couples for each book. It's like you move on to the friends and stuff like that. What has it been like for you to focus on the same characters?
Yeah, I mean, I really like this because, I enjoy sort of bopping around between couples, but I've been in a relationship for a very long time. I think my partner and I have been together for, I think it's 19 years this year.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a long time. And, getting to the point where you're together is great, but I think developing as a couple and as people who are purposely growing together, I think is even more interesting because you get to see sort of who you become together rather than meeting each other where you are when you first get together. And I just think that deepening and intertwining and, getting to know each other at a level that goes far, far beyond the surface, I think is just even more interesting and just a little bit more compelling than just sort of like being done after one book.
There's a series I'm listening to right now, and it's the same couple, and they really grow each book. And so your favorite book, is like the third, fourth, fifth book. I just think that's really beautiful. Because, like you say, at that point,
they're really getting up there and they really are starting to know each other, or they're starting to kind of come apart, and you could just see them put each other back together. And
I'm a relationship hopper in the one series that I'm doing, but I do want to go back to the original couple, so it's giving me some ideas here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can do it for every couple necessarily, but I think, sometimes you just hit one where you're like, yes, there is more to dive into.
What is the number one thing that you want readers to take away from your books?
I would probably say that the thing I want people to take away is that I kind of mentioned this earlier, but like no matter how complex you think you are, or no matter how, many things that you have not necessarily wrong with you, but people or society has told you are wrong with you, or how different you are, that there is someone out there who will love you exactly how you are, for who you are, weirdness and all. And, that's something that was very important to me to hear sort of growing up. And that's something that I want my readers to also feel, that you can be very weird, you can be niche, you can be, someone who needs more help, and that there is still somebody who will love you as is.
It's so beautiful. What kind of themes do you think that you'll always write, or that come up often in your writing?
It's weird because I feel like grief comes up a lot for some reason, and I know why, but I feel like grief comes up quite a bit in my writing, and sometimes it is very obvious, direct grief, like a character has died and another character is sort of dealing with that. So with my first series, Emmeline sort of deals with that throughout the series because her mother has passed away. Her mother was her only parent that she knew at the time, and constant grief is sort of an issue with her, especially being a medium who can see ghosts. And then in my current series, Oliver is a necromancer, and this isn't a spoiler since it's on the back of the book, but Felipe is murdered in the first book, and Oliver accidentally brings him back to life. And Felipe is sort of grieving the life he knew. And I think throughout the books, he sort of is grieving, because I sort of treat being undead like a disability, and he's sort of grieving the things he could do and the life he had, or the life he thought he was going to have. And he's sort of moving toward this new life. So I feel like, as someone who has like chronic health issues, there is sometimes this grief that comes up with, I can't do this thing, or if I do this thing, it's going to hurt me more. And it takes a bit to sort of come to terms with that. And it's sort of its own sort of minor grief. And that just, I think, comes up quite a bit in my books, whether I like it or not.
I think that whether you like it or not, a lot of people have connected with it. It's really resonating with them.
Yeah, that's always kind of the hope, because it tends to feel very heavy, and then it's like, well, I hope people like this because
Yeah.
it seems to be my thing. So
When we go through some pretty heavy things in life and we want to process it in a safe, fictional way,
yeah.
One thing that I want to say, and I think is really great, is I've seen some amazing art of them.
Yeah.
People really love them, and that's just got to be such a great feeling to be like, oh my gosh, there's fan art of my book.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like the fan art was so unexpected, and I anytime I get fan art, I ride that high for like a week. I'm sure my partner probably thinks I'm being insufferable because I'm like, look at it. Look at my boys. Look at the artwork people made of my boys. I get so excited. I have a whole folder on my computer just saved of like artwork people have made. I've just sort of made my little file that I go to when I'm feeling like sad or, like I'm not doing well. It's like, let's just look at some fan art.
That's great. And, you really got to do it because sometimes it can be hard. You're just burnt out and at the is this even good anymore phase, which I feel like a lot of authors get to once they're towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, it stinks because, everything's predictable when you've read it 10 times and you've written it.
Yeah.
So you kind of lose objectivity.
what drew you to your subgenres?
Do you think you'll ever expand, write things different, or is like this historical fantasy it for you?
So I think probably historical fantasy will probably always be my main genre just because I love sort of the trappings of historical time periods. I would like to branch out into different time periods. One of the books that I have sort of percolating is set before and after World War I. So that's a series I'd like to get to probably within the next couple years. I've also had bouncing around my head, and I don't know when I'm going to get to this, but potentially a series of contemporary romances. That'll be also very, very queer and probably a little goth and stuff as well. But I have those sort of marinating in the background. But it'd be really weird to have to write something that involves cell phones and computers after, dealing with telegraphs and things like that for so long.
Yeah, it's like, what do you mean they don't have telegraphs in the 21st century? Come on now.
Yeah, instant communication.
And I think it kind of helps, though, to engage different parts of the brain. Like, I was writing a dark fantasy series for a while, and then I was like, all right, I need to get out of this. My brain is not in a good place. And then I went to something cozier. And then I went over to the historical bit. And I think once you come back to it, even though you haven't been doing it, you feel reinvigorated.
Yeah, I think everything sometimes you just need a little bit of a change of scenery or break, especially if you've been doing something very dark. It's easy to get sort of bogged down after a while. You got to break it up with something a little bit more, fun or lighthearted. I tend to do that with my short stories in between my books because they tend to be sort of like cozier or sillier, far less harrowing stakes.
And I feel like after you release a book, there's this kind of, what do I do with myself now? Like, obviously, you're going to start writing again, but like in that immediate period, it's like, wow, I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah, I mean, I just took like a month off because of, like the book came out in late October, and then I was like, oh, Thanksgiving. I'm like, you know what? From now until Thanksgiving, I'm just gonna because I'm a teacher, so I was like, I'm just gonna grade papers and play video games and just let my brain kind of chill for a month,
Yeah,
and then I'll get back into it.
that's a good idea. The holidays are a tough time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many other random stresses going on, and the weather's changing, and if you have like seasonal affect, things can get kind of rough for a little bit. So it's a time to be kind to yourself.
For sure. What advice do you have for other aspiring authors?
So, for my young writers, ironically, I teach creative writing to college students, and we were just talking about this the other day. I think, first and foremost, write for yourself. I think it's so easy to try to jump on a trend or to write what you think other people will like, but it's a really easy way to sort of fry your brain because you're writing something that you're really not into. So, your first audience, I think, should be you. And probably my other big piece of advice is also to experiment with your process and sort of figure out what works for you, because I think once again, especially with like TikTok and people sort of spouting advice online, it's easy to think that there's only one correct way to write or only one correct writing process, but it works for one person, doesn't work for another. And like fast drafting does not work for me. I am a slow putt methodical writer. And it works for my students, but it doesn't work for me all the time. So play around, figure out the process, do what works best for you.
It's amazing. How long have you been teaching for, if you don't mind me asking?
I believe 8 years.
That's great. Do you find that you're still learning for things that are relevant, like learning through your students at all? Like, are they modernizing you at all? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And it's funny sometimes because I've been teaching for 8 years and I've been publishing for like 10. And sometimes they ask me things and I'm like, I have never thought of that before. Because either it's like second nature because I've been doing this for forever, or it just didn't occur to me because it doesn't have anything to do with like a genre that I write, so they keep me on my toes and they keep me looking for new things having to do with craft or publishing. They make sure that I stay current with what's going on because I always want to make sure I can answer their questions adequately.
Nice. Do you have any book recommendations that you would like to share?
I was recently reading The City in Glass by Ning Vo, and that was fabulous. That was a book that I read and I just sat there for a minute like, damn, like that was just so good. And it's sort of technically it's about a demon and an angel sort of falling in love over the course of centuries. But what it's really about is this demon's love for humanity and the idea of death and rebirth and, bringing things back and making them even better. And I just loved it. It was just so, so good. I also read recently, I had never read T. Kingfisher before. I know that her work is very popular, but I had never gotten to her. And I'm also a big fan of Diana Winnie Jones. So I've been reading T. Kingfisher, and her books have that same sort of feel as Jones's books, and that whole sort of Howl's Moving Castle and her Eric Chant series. And with T. Kingfisher, the Paladin series, Paladin's Grace, all those books are really good. Peter Jelly Clark's The Dead Cattail Assassins was also really, really good. Though that one is sort of undead assassins and sort of wibbly wobbly time things going on.
You and the Undead.
I know. I have such a type. It's not even funny.
Have you read The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Khaw?
I love that book. That was one of my absolute favorites last year.
It seems like it's up your alley.
It was so good. And I have her other book. I can't think of the name of it. It's the one with the train. It's a book that was written with someone else.
Oh, okay. I haven't read that yet.
Yeah, I haven't read it either. It's sitting on my Kindle, but I'm like, I need to get to it.
So we need undead, queer vibes. That's you.
Yes. So the undead's optional. The queer vibes are almost always a requirement.
Where can readers find out more about your work?
So you can definitely find more about my work at my website, karajorgensen.com. And if you join my newsletter, you get a free sapphic cis-trans romance novella. And of course, I'm on things like Blue Sky, Instagram, places like that as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing what comes next for Oliver and Philippe and all the work that you do. This has been great.
Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun today.